Welcome to the Wilson Center. I am Sherri Goodman. I'm a senior fellow with the Environmental Change and Security Program in Polar Institute and former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. It's my privilege today to welcome President Duque, former President of Colombia, and a distinguished fellow here with us at the Wilson Center, to talk about the recent climate conference, the COP, in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, from which you most recently returned. And climate change was a hallmark of your leadership as president, and so it's a great privilege to have you here at the Wilson Center. So, Mr. President, in a recent article in our publication called The Hill, you commented that COP27 is a key platform for galvanizing action, and you also said that climate change is foreign policy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you saw that play out at the COP?
Well, Sherri, first of all, thank you so much. It's a great honor to share this space with you. You have been a reference in all this fight against climate change for many years, so it's an honor for me to be here. I have to say that my takeaways from Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 are maybe summarized in the word bittersweet. So on the bitter part, I think we missed many of the world players to be present in Sharm el-Sheikh. And obviously, I think there wasn't a major global agreement on substantial matters. So I think that's the bitter part. Now, on the sweet part, what I think was very important is that a couple of things were launched that will have a significant impact. One is the Africa Carbon Market Initiative that has been supported by Rockefeller Foundation, the IKEA Foundation, the Bezos Earth Fund, by a group of organizations such as McKinsey, Vera, USAID, and a great participation of potential buyers that committed to have $500 million to buy credits from projects that will be generated in Africa. But this also is related to the idea of creating for the first time the biodiversity credits. So I think that was a major announcement that was made in Sharm. The second thing is that more countries decided to engage in the High Ambition Coalition for Nature, willing to have 30% of the territory declared protected area by 2030 or before. So I think this also puts a lot of momentum before the COP15 in Montreal that is going to take place some weeks from now. And the third element that I consider was very important is that there were major commitments from international environmental philanthropy. So I believe that even though we didn't have like a major agreement or a major announcement in terms of world agreement, what we saw is the dynamic that is taking place in the global south of putting climate change as a priority and having funds that will support that process of putting it as a priority at a presidential level.
Well, I really appreciate your focus on the sweet part of that, because I think it's important for our listeners to understand that despite the fact that not all countries were represented, and that perhaps not all the climate finance goals were reached, these new coalitions are making some important progress. So say a little bit more about what this means for your own country and for other countries in the global south.
So I'm here at the Woodrow Wilson Center as a distinguished fellow and working on the concept of the Global Americas, which is try to see all the challenges and opportunities that the whole Americas have today. And I have to say that the Americas is crucial for the fight against climate change and for the enhancement of climate action, because we have the Amazon, but we also have more than 60% of the world high altitude ecosystems. We have a very strong part of coral reefs. So there are many and multiple reasons why this is so important when we look at the hemisphere. And one of the strongest coalitions that has been built is the High Ambition Coalition for Nature. I am in some sort of way ambassador to the High Ambition Coalition, but most importantly to the movement that is called the Coalition for Nature, in which other heads of state or former heads of state participate to have the commitments of current heads of state to take the countries to at least 30% of protected areas inside their governments. The story that Colombia has as a reference model is that in our administration, when we assumed office, we had 14% of the territory declared a protected area, and we left it at 34%. So we basically get to 37% on the maritime area and 31% on the on-land territory. And those were major achievements because we didn't wait until 2030, we did it before. Now the challenge now is, once you declare, you have to protect, and that means you have to put your resources there. We left some resources from the Colombian government that were matched by international environmental philanthropy. But I think this model has to be replicated, and we also were able to connect with Ecuador, with Costa Rica, and Panama to create the Brotherhood Protected Area in the maritime Pacific that today is the largest maritime protected area in the world. So if we look at these trends and we look at the clear idea that more conservation projects need to be present in the carbon credit market, I think Latin America has a tremendous opportunity, and it will be very important to keep the idea of a public-private partnership so that we can get communities to protect those areas that have been declared and try to give them a way of living that is sustainable, that is scalable, that is replicable, so that they continue protecting those areas that are crucial for the fight against climate change. And I have to summarize this. We're not going to get to carbon neutrality if we don't protect nature. And carbon neutrality is very important, but nature positive policies are much very important, and they have to go hand in hand. And that only happens when you connect conservation with green financing and allow the communities to have a sustainable way of living.
Well, I can see why you are a global ambassador for nature, because you so eloquently describe how this process works. Let's talk a little bit about the ocean, the maritime dimension of it, which, as you underscore, is so important, and connect ocean health and ocean protection and decarbonization to the livelihoods of those in the global south.
So I think we all have some sort of way, a conscience in society that deforestation is bad. And today, the second largest amount of emissions in the world is deforestation. And if deforestation were a country, it will be the third largest emitter in the world. But when think about deforestation, we never think about the equivalent of deforestation in the oceans. And the fact is that coral reefs represent the place where 45% of the maritime life takes place. And those coral reefs in the world are being destroyed by trawling practices. And what trawling practices does to the coral reefs can be described as the deforestation of the ocean. And the amount of carbon dioxide that the destruction of the coral reefs generate per year is almost as equivalent as all the emissions of the global aviation sector. So we need to protect the coral reefs. We need to declare protected areas, and we need to make them no-take in some of them, in a great part of them, so that we protect the species, we protect the coral reefs, we protect maritime life, and at the same time we contribute to the reduction of emissions derived from these practices. So we did it in Colombia. We left Colombia with 37% of the maritime areas declared protected areas, but at the same time, we started getting involved with communities and the fishing sector, demonstrating that to protect the coral reefs, that protect the life of those species, and also two very important policies that we undertook, which was the recovering of 1 million corals and having the first blue carbon bond, carbon credit, generated in Colombia to protect the mangroves at the Cispatá Bay, in the Morrosquillo Gulf, in the Colombian Caribbean. They are now reference models to be replicated somewhere else in the world. So those are things we did, and to protect the maritime areas is not a choice, it's a moral duty.
Yes, thank you. That's so important, and that's so vitally important. And thank you for explaining how ocean health and ocean biodiversity is so central to climate action. So you also have been such a leader in Colombia on environmental peace building as part of your time as president. Can you connect that environmental peace building journey in Colombia to the climate and security context that we face right now?
Well, it's very important, Sherri, because as I was saying, deforestation is the second largest trigger of emissions. It represents 20% of all the world emissions. So we have to fight deforestation, and we have to make a big change in the way we use land to turn it into something positive and not something negatively growing. The fact that we have to pass from 12.5 gigatons of emissions from improper use of land to zero in the next 8 years just represents how big the challenge is. So in the case of Colombia, we did various things. We were able to pass in Congress unanimously a climate action bill that has all the weight and efforts and milestones that have to be achieved sector by sector in order for us to be carbon neutral by 2050 and reduce by 51% our emissions towards 2030. But we also passed a bill in which we increased the sanctions for environmental crimes. Most of the environmental crimes didn't have an imprisonment punishment sentence. So we need to introduce that. And that allowed us to use the carrot and the stick. The stick was law and order to enforce, because there's a lot of deforestation taking place by illegal coca production, or illegal crops, illegal mining, illegal wood production, illegal cattle and livestock. So we fought that. And I think it started changing the idea that there was no punishment. But we also created the natural conservation contracts to work with communities that are clearly exercising a job to fight deforestation and become forest guards. So I think those elements, those examples that have to be replicated and scaled up in other places in the world legitimize what we effectively did. And I believe now, with the idea of the carbon credit market evolving, that we need to have more conservation projects being able to enter that market and be able to monetize resources by the communities in the rural areas, and generating for them a sustainable way of income in protection and not in destruction. So I think that idea, that way that we move forward, can be, as I've said many times, a reference model for other nations.
Are you hopeful now with the new president in Brazil that they will be able to undertake some comparable actions in this regard?
I have to say something. With President Bolsonaro, when we called for the Leticia Pact in 2019, he signed it. He and his team signed the Leticia Pact in order to have a strengthening of the cooperation among the Amazonic countries and fight deforestation and find nature-based solutions or market-driven nature-based solutions. So I think there is a general commitment from Brazil, who is also the host of the Amazonic Cooperation Treaty Organization, OTCA, that for them is not an option to be absent of these discussions. They have to be present. Now, I believe that the voice should be higher, and in terms of how loud they defend the Amazon. But I also believe that this cannot be neither ideological nor politicized. And I think there is a state policy that can be strengthened, but also a local commitment from the governors of the Amazonic areas of Brazil. And we have to acknowledge that in the whole Amazonic region of Latin America, almost 50 million people live there, which is almost the same size as my country, Colombia. So we have to also find for them ways in which they can collaborate for the protection without losing opportunities, and instead maybe transcending to a new, more environmentally focused economy. So I don't think there is an option for Brazil. Either they take a strong leadership or they'll lose the possibility, because at this moment we have lost in the last 4 decades the equivalent of the territory of France and Germany together by deforestation in the Amazon. And there's no option that can continue. So I think the commitment from Brazil, not only from government perspective, but from state perspective, national government perspective, that transcends the political cycle, is the right way to go.
And the subnational leaders, the governors, indeed are very important. And as you've noted, they're very important in climate action overall. Okay, my last question, Mr. President, is to connect the dots on migration from the region and climate change, and how you see climate change affecting the mobility of people in the region, and what you think we should do about it.
I have been saying for quite some time that migration is going to be stronger and stronger and stronger and growing because of the effects of climate change, that we have never seen something like that. The fact that we're going to see massive climate-driven migration in the world, it's undeniable. So you either wait to face the problem or you start acting today. And we're seeing in Latin America and the Caribbean that every year we're having more frequency of Category 5, Category 4 hurricanes. We're seeing also that coastal erosion, it's passing a very strong debt to new generations. And at the same time, we see that the abrupt changes in climate put countries such as mine in a yearly circumstance of having lots of flooding or having droughts. Having droughts of having flooding. But it seems that there's not an intermediary stage of calm, because we're moving radically to those climate expressions that pass a very strong debt to communities and that can harm the way of living of thousands and thousands of people. So I think we have to do much more on the prevention side, but we also need to identify mechanisms in which we can generate opportunities in Latin America. And that's why I think bringing investments from other parts of the world that the U.S. has in an industrial base to be shipped to Latin America and open opportunity for Latin Americans, I think it's a way to reduce the pressure on the U.S. southern border. But saying that, it is also very important to be able to do bold things in terms of climate action and climate investing in areas that will be put in danger. Coastal erosion is very costly to face it. At the same time, when you have to do investments in order to protect cities that are below or pretty close to the sea level. And those investments require strong financing. And that's why I have been saying that through the IMF and other multilateral elements, we shouldn't consider, for at least for 8 years, climate crisis investment not part of the way we count the fiscal deficit, because otherwise you'll have the climate action budget being in conflict with education, health, transportation, and you name it. And by that, you'll be reducing a budget that needs to be accelerated in the course of the next 8 years. So I hope that within the multilateral system, and maybe with the support of the IMF, it can be said that climate action investments, for at least for a period of time, will not be counted as part of above the line fiscal balance calculations.
And that was an active discussion at the COP this year.
Well, a lot of people have made this reflection. I've been saying it for a couple of years, but I believe we need to find those green financing solutions as fast as possible.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for leading on so many fronts for climate action, for the safety of your own country, but also for the safety of and security of those around the world.
Sherri, thank you so much. It has been a great honor for me.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Best.